What's up, friends? Today I'm going to be reviewing one of Meepo's cheapest boards, the Meepo V5. This has been coming for a while, and I'm happy to finally get this out there and give you guys a look at a very budget level board. Alright, just to put some disclaimers out there, this is one of the cheapest boards that I have taken a look at, period. The X-Way Ripple is technically cheaper than this, but it's kind of in a different size class since this is technically a long board. Now, with that in mind, the too long didn't watch version of this review is that this board is essentially a hyper budget entry level board. And it may sound weird coming in at $400, but the features and performance of this board are really geared towards a first-time board buyer, and that's sort of the narrative that I'm going to be painting throughout this review. But I would love it if you would stay for the whole time to see my performance rating as well as my RBEM score. And if you like these shorter types of reviews, be sure to leave a like and comment below what you think. And what do you think about the Meepo V5? Is it a great first-time board? I think so. Now, I said that it's a great first-time board, but it comes with a catch. This is a great first-time board if you can only ever spend $400 on your entry-level board. Now, again, it may seem like a lot of money, but $400 is very entry-level for e-skates, and personally for me, I wouldn't even bother. Do not bother buying this board if you think that you're going to get super into the sport, because it'd be better for you to save your money and upgrade to the Meepo Envy, which is another tier above this. Honestly, I think you should skip the middle V3S as well, because I think that the Envy is just a much better experience overall, and it's going to last you a lot longer. Now, there are some pros of this board, and we're going to go through some of those right now. Pro number one, this board is lightweight. It comes in at only 17.6 pounds, and it's got this convenient little handle here, which is kind of 0.2. As a combination of weight and portability, you have two great positives there. This thing is very easy to sort of just grab by the handle, and honestly, as much as I dislike the aesthetic of having a handle in the center of your deck and the feel of how it flexes in the deck, you have to admit, and I have to admit, that it is very comfortable to hold, very easy to carry around, and makes going up and down stairs and taking it out of your car much easier. Now, one thing that I didn't necessarily think was going to be a pro, which I'll take as Pro 3, is that it's hub motors. Now, for me, usually hub motors are a big negative, but at this price point and at this weight, the hub motors make a lot of sense, and honestly, the ride feel from these specific hub motors is not bad at all. It's much better than I expected, and in fact, for a first-time board buyer, hub motors can be easier than belts simply because there's no belt to break. When you have a belt broken, you pretty much have to order a new one, use a spare from the kit that the manufacturer sent you, or find one on your own, and doing that for a first-time buyer may be a little bit difficult. There's plenty of resources out there to find them, but in any case, I think hubs at this price point on this board are actually a pro. Now we've got some of the positive stuff out of the way. There's a lot of things on this board that just didn't really suit me and didn't suit my favorite riding style. The first of those is the deck. I'm really not a big fan of this deck for a number of reasons. One, it's pretty stiff even though it's thin, and that gives you a lot of vibrations coming into your feet. Not the most comfortable thing to stand on, but at the same time it's stiff, but it flexes more than I would expect, sort of centered around this handle. I really do think that this handle is a weak spot on this board. At this deck width, it flexes more on the left side. Well, left side for me since I'm a goofy rider with right foot forwards. This side of the board flexes more than the other. It's especially noticeable if you stand closer to the middle of the board rather than having your feet all the way at the ends. So deck is not a huge selling point for me there, and since that's what you stand on all the time, it made it a little bit difficult to put miles on this board. hence why this is a mini review and not a 100-mile gear review. The next thing that I am not a huge fan of is the battery. Now, this thing has a 10S battery in it. I believe it's a 10S 2P. I'll put on screen what the cells are if I'm able to find that, but it's a 10S 2P battery, and I think it's 18650 cells, and this thing really just does not get very much range. In my range test, which we'll go through the numbers a little bit more later, but it got just over 6 miles, and while technically Meepo claims that it only gets 11 miles on the standard range battery, which is what I've got here, I don't really think that you'll do a ton better on the extended range one either, simply because they're 18650 cells, and honestly nowadays that's pretty dated. So battery and deck are two things that are not great for me. The third thing is the ESC. Now, I will shout out one awesome feature of this ESC, which is not common or doesn't really exist on Hobbywing boards. Since this is a lingyi board, it has hill hold. And hill hold is an amazing feature that lets you hold your place on a slope. And it's actually fairly strong. You can overpower it, but it will hold you in place on most slopes. And that's very useful, especially on a hub board when it has low rolling resistance. So I hope that someday Hobbywing will have the option to turn something like that on, but it's very useful on this board with its low rolling resistance. Going back to the negative, the rest of the ESC is not so good. The power is below average, as you would expect for a board at this price point, but the responsiveness is also below average, coming in with sort of a jerky feel and something that's not very refined. When you get back onto the throttle at higher speeds, it kind of jolts a little bit. When you let off the throttle too fast, it doesn't feel super good either, and it just does not give a fully confidence-inspiring ride when you're taking this thing around the block. Now, that is something that you can get used to, but I've ridden a lot of Hobbywing ESCs, and I have to say, this one does not quite compare. Alrighty, now that we've kind of gone through a summary of the board, I do want to keep this on the shorter side. We're just going to go straight into the PSPEC Score. If you haven't seen the PSPEC Score before, it is an accumulation of all the data that I record for every single board, which includes 100-meter sprint and 0 to 20 mile an hour tests to test the acceleration, a braking test from 15 to 0 miles an hour to test how strong the brakes are, a torque test to see how much torque it has at 0 miles an hour, and a top speed test to see how fast it can go, and then finally a range test to see how far it can go. Now, all of those get combined together in a weighted score to create the PSPEC, and I will show you all these charts, which I think are super awesome. I'm super nerdy and love data. So first off, we're going to look at the acceleration testing, and for the 0 to 20 mile an hour test, I'll put the chart on the screen here. The Meepo V5 comes in at third to last place, and again, some of these results are really not going to be surprising at this price point and power level, but it came in at third to last place with a best of 10.09 0 to 20. For the 100-meter sprint, the Meepo V5 came in pretty far down on the list again at second to last with a time of 13.21 seconds best. Now, these are not super surprising since it's a low-powered board. Next up, for braking, it actually did a little bit better than I expected, but still not super great. Coming in kind of middle of the pack. I'm not going to count that, you can look at it on the chart, but came in kind of middle of the pack with 25.75 feet as its best. Now, braking is important, and for this board with the hub motors, it's really not a bad amount. It will be worse if you're heavier though, and you can't really do anything about that by changing the wheel size or anything, or changing the belt ratio, because it's hub motor. So you're kind of stuck with that braking no matter what. And due to the simplicity of this controller, you don't have any control over how strong the brakes are. The top speed test yielded us a top speed of only 24 miles an hour. I was able to confirm that with GPS, which is kind of towards the bottom of the list, but for a board like this, is honestly more than enough and felt a little bit sketchy at times. Finally, for the torque test, not finally, there's one more. For the torque test, it came in pretty low on the list, but not quite at the bottom at 7.94 Newton meters. Again, hub motors, not very much mechanical advantage, not many amps going into them, and a small battery. And now finally, the other thing that you've probably been curious about, the range. Now, I already mentioned it before, but the range on this thing comes out to only about 6.68 miles. And that is on the standard testing route, which means it did complete the hill one time. I'll put the little elevation chart on the screen of my testing route, but it did complete the hill one time, which is impressive. It did do it slow. I think it was a little while ago, but I think it was about 13 miles an hour. So it made it, but not very quickly. In any case, that is the summary of all the PSPEC scores. So now if we go ahead and look at the PSPEC composite score, we come out to a total of 20.9, which places it pretty low down on the list, but not in last place. There are a couple below that, one of which is a hub board. Oh, there's only one below it. I don't have the chart up on here, so there's only one below it, but it's also a hub board, so not too surprising. I do think that this PSPEC is a fair score for the performance of this board, especially compared to all the other competition. One other thing I'll put on here is the board range versus advertised. This is a new metric that I'll be including in all my reviews, and I'll just throw that on screen now. Versus advertised, it did a little bit better than some of the other boards had done, but still is just past half of the advertised range. So this is just proof to sort of show you that you should not always believe the advertised range on these things, because most of the time it's overstated. So there you go. That's pretty much the PSPEC score, and I hope you guys enjoyed hearing all that information. Let's move on to the subjective scoring, which is the RBEM score for boards. All right, so for the RBEM score, we have a number of factors to take into consideration, and we're going to go through them one by one, albeit a little bit quickly. I'll put some cool B-roll in the background as I'm talking and give you a summary of the scores at the end. Starting off with build quality, the Meepo V5 is built all right, but not to the highest quality. It earns a 6 out of 10 for mid-quality materials, mid-quality plastics, and generally a fairly solid feeling board. Again, it's not too low down on the range, but it gets a 6 out of 10 for average build quality. Next up, the deck. I was not a huge fan of this deck. It's a little bit skinny, it's a little bit thin, it's a little bit weirdly flexy. I don't know how to describe that. Uneven flex is what I experienced on this thing with this handle cutout. Doesn't absorb vibrations very well, but it does get the job done, and I think even heavier riders will be okay on this deck without it breaking, but I wouldn't stand too close to the center. So it gets a 4 out of 10 for the deck, really not my favorite. For the remote, we have a pretty basic remote that comes with the Meepo V5. It does work, but the only options you really got are changing the speed modes 1 through 4, seeing the board battery in a number of lights 1 through 4, and then it has a little signal indicator, and as far as I know, there's no way to change direction. There may be a way. I'll put it on screen if there is a button combination. All right, so it looks like on the back of the remote it actually says there's a way to change the brake mode. Let's just give it a try real quick, actually. Turn the board on. Also, one feature that this is missing on this remote and ESC is that there's no smart turn on. There is roll to start, so if you push the board on the ground, it will start. There we go, board is on. Now if we hold down the brake and I try to turn this, you can kind of see, but it won't let me turn the wheel. That is the hill hold feature coming in. Now if we hold this down and press the other button, it looks like it has different levels of hill hold. Yeah, it's got 4 different levels. I'm not sure if that changes the amount of brakes that you have, but it was set at whatever the default was out of the box for my testing, which is what I will always do. Now, don't know if you can turn that off, but I do like that hill hold feature, and we're kind of going off here. The remote works, gets the job done. However, if the remote is low on battery with this little light flashing, you cannot ride your board. All you can do is brake. I found that out the other day the hard way when my remote was dead and I forgot my charger. So if you forget to charge your remote, make sure you bring a charger with you. Otherwise, you won't be able to activate the accelerator, and that's a real shame. The ESC on this board is okay, but not the best again, and it brings only a 4 out of 10. This is sort of due to the combination of the jerkiness of the throttle, the lack of power, the lack of features, and one of the redeeming factors is that hill hold function and the rolled start. Both of those are pretty convenient. I think, yeah, there you go. Push one wheel hard enough, you'll be able to start it up. And it also has a battery indicator on the enclosure, which is convenient. It does also have auto off after a certain amount of time. I don't know what that time is, but that's good to have, so it gets a 4 out of 10. Trucks and bushings on this thing come in at a 5 out of 10. Now, the setup that's on here is a combo of 92A in the front and then 92A in the back, all barrels with cupped washers. This gives you a somewhat stable feel, but at the same time, it feels pretty unstable when you get towards those higher speeds, while also not giving you the best turning radius. So not a great combo to have in my opinion. I didn't mess with the bushings a ton, but when I try these boards out, I usually try to review them with whatever the stock setup is. Honestly, it's been a while, so I don't remember if it came with another set of bushings, but my go-to is always just throwing riptide bushings in there. So if you don't get enough turning radius, change out the bushings. Honestly, you probably will want to do that anyway. The trucks are okay. The rear truck is cast. The front truck looks like it's probably forged. It says shredder on it. That's Meepo's specialty shredder trucks. The rear one is sort of a standard shaped one with hub motor holders built into it, and they perform okay. The carving feel is not super great on them. Again, this is partly due to the bushings, but also due to the truck geometry. They feel okay at speed, but not great. Wheel options for this board, it's going to be a 1.2 out of 5. This is hub motors, so you do have a limited number of options available from Cloud Wheel, and it's good to know, but anything larger that you put on here is going to reduce your acceleration and your braking, but will increase your top speed. So you might be interested in looking at some of those hub motor sleeves. I know Cloud Wheel has an extensive list of compatibilities on their site, so you'll have to check it out there. Other than that, I can't think of any other sleeves. I know Hollow Wheel was working on sleeves at one point, but I don't know if they're released yet. So for wheel options, it gets a 1.2 out of 5, mostly because of the hub motors. Next up, we have water resistance, and it gets a 3 out of 5. It's fairly well sealed, but I've seen better. Most likely, water's not going to get into your enclosures and ruin anything, but could be better, could be worse, so it gets a 3 out of 5. I'll put the IP rating on screen here if it has one listed on the website. Customer service, we've got Meepo. So Meepo as a company is pretty big now, pretty big time, and I think they have decent customer service overall. People have bad days with them, people have good days, but it's not super consistent, so they get a 3 out of 5. My experience so far has been mostly positive, albeit with long response times. The final thing on here is price and value, and for this it gets a 3.5 out of 5, which is a little bit on the higher side. For the price being $400, I do think you get a decent amount of kit. It really is a first-time buyer's board, in my opinion, though. You're going to outgrow the speed and stability and power super fast, but it will get you into the sport and it'll get you an idea of what an e-board could feel like. So if you're looking for your first board, this could be for you, but if it were me, I would rather save a little bit more money and get the Meepo Envy instead. Or another board from another company if you're interested, but since this is a Meepo review, we're talking about Meepos first. The total RBEM score for this board comes out to 34.7, which puts it pretty far down on the list. In fact, it is in last place out of the boards that I've reviewed. There are a lot more boards coming in the future, so there will be more scores added to this sheet. But for now, it gets a 34.7, and it definitely has some room to grow. If Meepo were to release another V5, I think there are definitely some improvements they can make. Switch out that ESC, maybe for another cheap hobby wing one, because they're a lot more easy to use and a lot more comfortable. Maybe do some bushing improvements and take another look at this deck. Maybe use more flexible wood and add some composite. That will make it more expensive, but as of right now, it's just not my favorite. So there you go, there's your RBEM score. In summary, the Meepo V5 seems to be something that would be a great first time board, but I just think people are gonna outgrow it too fast. So if I'm going to recommend another board, definitely looking at the Meepo Envy, which I will be putting out a review on soon. I got all the data done for it, I've got all the testing done, so I just need to sit down, record the review, and give you guys my thoughts. So make sure you get subscribed and keep an eye out for that. But as for the Meepo V5, I really appreciate Meepo sending this out for me to look at. And I did have a good time getting some more numbers on my chart, but unfortunately this board is just not for me. So I can't recommend it wholeheartedly. But there are definitely buyers that will be interested in this information and interested in my opinion. So thank you so much for watching. And if you have any boards that you want me to look at specifically, leave them down in the comments below and I'll try to reach out to those companies and get them to send me a board so I get more data on my charts and give you guys better analysis. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, keep on riding, and peace out.